Evening, everyone.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of 2018. Our live legal news updates are back.
Yeah, it's all back now.
Yeah.
Back, ready to kickstart the year.
Yeah, you're looking forward to it, Kishan?
I am. Lots to look forward to, of course, because, you know, lots happening in the legal world and the world generally, I guess.
Well, there has been. I mean, I guess we did leave last year with lots and lots of news going on, and I guess it's kind of been a really quick start to the new year with everyone. I thought maybe what we might do today is just kind of go through the things that have been in the headlines that we might see come up as legal issues in this year, and maybe we'll see things kind of coming through either in cases or legislation or that kind of thing. I mean, you know, so kind of I thought it might be good to start with cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Seems to be evolving. Bitcoin, cryptocurrency.
Exactly.
The thing that everyone seems to be talking about at the moment now.
Yeah, big talking point.
Yeah. I mean, look, there are so many things. Kishan, I don't know how much you've been keeping up with it, but I think I wasn't one of those people who was very involved in Bitcoin, and I heard about it, friends told me about it last year and the year before, and I went, oh, that's just doesn't make any sense to me. But I think there's a lot that's been going on. We know people who are kind of getting involved in, because we're in this WeWork setting, so people that are starting up and creating exchanges and things. So yeah, I thought it might be useful to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. It's an interesting concept, of course, and you know, a lot of people have invested in it, and there's always pros and cons about whether or not you should invest or not invest, and how risky it is, and all the rest of it. So, of course, as some of you may know, the whole market around cryptocurrency at the moment is unregulated. You know, there's no sort of, it's not like a normal investors platform which will be regulated and backed by the FCA. I mean, there's a financial ombudsman compensation scheme if things go wrong, for example. So how are Bitcoin companies getting around that? So, you know, knowing some companies, what I've realised that is, in order for some Bitcoin companies to get ahead of the market, they are trying to create this competitive edge by showing that they have an obligation to their consumers and to the potential investors.
So why don't we... hi Anura and hi Benita, thanks for joining.
Hi guys.
Always good to have viewers. I think it might be useful for people who don't know much about regulation to kind of explain it. So obviously the key thing is, if you're an investor, as you were saying, the FCA regulates. Now, I thought it might be helpful for people to know that actually if they're looking to invest, some of the hallmarks maybe they need to be looking at is this a company that is voluntarily providing information about themselves? So, you know, are they established in a reputable place? Have they signed up to some kind of voluntary scheme? Can you find out who their people are?
How transparent they are.
Transparent they are. Because I guess the kinds of claims that you would see coming out of it, and I suspect that this year we'll see litigation, would be things like misrepresentation. If people have been told, you know, you're going to make loads of money, and then they lose their money, and the money that they've invested goes missing. Those type of claims. I mean, I don't know whether that's your feeling or not. I
think so. I think that there's always going to be scope for claims and litigation work. But what's quite interesting is that this is not such a new concept, because there are companies like Zopa, for example, that do interpersonal lending, and they're not regulated by the FCA. What they've done is to create a sort of their own indemnity fund. So should things go wrong, the company have got a pool of funds, you know, to pay out if loans don't go correct, or if it hasn't worked out, the investment hasn't worked out. And so that sort of model is now being replicated by some Bitcoin companies. In order to kind of create that edge, they're saying, look, we'll create some guidelines which are quite similar to what the FCA and the compensation schemes are doing, and you know, that's going to give some comfort to investors that want to invest in cryptocurrency. So I guess the lesson to be learnt for our viewers is that if you are interested in this space, and if you want to do some investment in this area, then I would do some due diligence and, you know, do some research on the companies you're working with, and see what kind of processes they have in place. And what's interesting as well is that a lot of these bigger Bitcoin companies now that have springboarding are actually working together to create some sort of framework quite similar to this.
I know. I think the thing is, what I'm a bit concerned about is that, I think that's good and it's great to have a voluntary framework. but let's not over-egg it. Like, this is an area that is highly risky, that is completely unregulated. You're relying on, kind of the goodwill of the people that you are investing with. So, I mean, I think you're right. It's good news that there are people out there who are wanting to kind of provide a voluntary scheme, but there is nothing. There is no FCA oversight of this. There's no ombudsman involved. But absolutely, do your due diligence.
I think there's a question, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a question.
Let's have a look.
Let's see what I think it might be.
Sanura, He says, obviously, as a wealth manager, Bitcoin is an interesting disruption. However, it fills me with fear with a lack of regulation, having a number of counterpart risk issues as well as currency issues. Plus, with more than 1,400 currencies in the market, there's very little proof of concept, but the appetite to invest is driving further inward investment, I believe.
I think that, this is a very, very well-made point, that there are lots and lots, 1,400 currencies, I think you're right, and probably counting. So I think the point that you make, Kishan, just being very, very careful about where you're putting your money. I mean, look, the technology and change is inevitable. I think it's well worth, I mean, we're not investors in Anura, you'll know better than us how to advise people in this area, but, any kind of risk that you take. But on the legal side, making sure that you understand that if you are investing with people, making sure there are good contracts in place at least, you know who those people are, you get certain confirmations from them, or you can, you're sensible with it. If there's a exchange that's set up in Belize, maybe think about whether you're going to be able to do anything if something goes wrong. That kind of thing, I think, is sensible.
Yes, definitely. And I know you're spot on, and you're absolutely right with what you say. And with that, there's also other issues such as data risk and data issues. And it's an online platforms that we're dealing with, and you're transferring personal data, and also quite often money is being exchanged online. And some companies don't have the right security measures in place to protect that data, and with the GDPR coming in, there's going to be a greater obligation on these companies to comply, and I feel that some companies may not be ready for that yet. So that's a data issue is one of them, but also as we know, tax, exactly. So there's other global macro issues such as tax and money laundering risks, which are massive to think about.
So, I mean, I think on the tax side, I've spoken to a few accountants about this, and quite often they'll say, look, they don't believe at the moment that gains in your cryptocurrency, so one of the things about increasing the value of your cryptocurrency, your virtual currency, won't necessarily incur a capital gains charge, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that it works is you invest your money into a wallet that if the value goes up, you can draw down. If there's money there, you'll draw it down. And I think there's probably going to be some kind of taxation on that. There must be some income tax. But we're not tax advisors, but well worth bearing that in mind. Oric is asking, are you talking about what? So I think maybe let's explain. Cryptocurrency, when we say that, is this the most well-known cryptocurrency is Bitcoin. Is the idea that you've got virtual currency that people are putting a value on because they're limited in number. So I think at the moment, I don't know the figure off the top of my head, there's something like £14,000 for a Bitcoin, and there are a limited number of Bitcoins, and therefore people will invest in parts of those, and if there are enough people interested, then the value goes up, and the idea is that you can take that out in real life. But that's what we're talking about, and there are lots of permutations of that happening. So Bitcoin, a big thing this year.
Big thing this year.
People have really got involved.
To watch out for.
I guess also, I think this is my feeling. So we've also started the year with the collapse of Carillion.
Yeah, so it's quite sad and unfortunate what's happened, but it's a massive impact on a lot of employees out there who used to work for them. And going to the root of why it's happened, people are saying that it was because of bad management, really, wasn't it? And, not understanding and forecasting for costs and having quite inflexible contracts in place. So, it's a real shame what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing around this is there's both employment pensions, and subcontractor issues.
Yeah.
So we suspect there's going to be a whole raft of litigation around this, and obviously on a political side, consideration of private finance initiative type contracts and how they're being governed. So my personal feeling is that there is, because of all the stuff that's happened over the last couple of years, there's going to be a consideration of how public finances are used, and I think that's going to impact on things like, well, they're saying, the Labour Party certainly was saying that they're looking to try and strengthen subcontractor rights.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of the people who are losing out with the Carillion thing is are not just employees, are people who are subcontracting with, you know, on government contracts.
Yeah.
And therefore, you know, they don't have any protections in place. I mean, there's an issue over the pensions anyway, but there are no protections for subcontractors. So, you know, that is a worry, and I think there's going to be some things around that.
It'd be interesting to see I can't really see what the government would do in that situation, especially I don't know what their proposals are, but it's always a difficult one when a company's in a situation that Carillion's in. You can go as far as putting quite watertight clauses in the subcontractors agreement, but if a company is going bust, then the legal recourse for that, there's not much one can do.
Yeah.
In that situation.
Well, there was no insurance either, was there? So
that was the key point.
One of the problems here is there's no insurance with the Carillion thing. So I think there's going to be lots of issues around the subcontract. There's obviously claims that employees will be bringing. I think you asked earlier, why is it that they're not bailing the company out? Because there are thousands of employees are going to be affected.
Yeah.
So likely things around that. Oric has said that, well, she doesn't know what she's talking about on the cryptocurrency point. You might be right, Oric. It's not an area that I'm most familiar with, but I think our point is that we're saying that if you are looking at it and trying to make sure that you are investing in something sound, make sure you know who's behind these things.
Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. So that's Carillion. What other things do you think has caught your eye?
Well, women's rights, of course.
Yeah.
It's a sad state of affairs what's happening generally, but with the President's Club and the issues around what's happened recently, I think that needs to be explored. It's about time that we all as a society come clean on what's going on and really be open about our dialogue on it. Not only just in Parliament, you know, obviously there's been loads of speeches recently made in Parliament about it, but also just generally each organisation should look inward and think about what policies they have in place, what's happening. This was a charity event and, you know, these kind of things happen. So, you know, I picked up the news on this recently. So there's a retired High Court judge called Laura Cox who led a review about just generally women's rights. And she said that with the evidence that she found, it was really deeply disturbing how there's been an increase in the level of violence, abuse and harassment against women. And the report actually found that half of women had suffered sexual harassment at work, and nearly 2/3 of women have found, have experienced sexual harassment in public. So that is quite a worrying statistic, and I think it's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, there's obviously legislation around protecting that kind of situation, but I think it's hard sometimes for women to come forward when they experience something like that.
Well, I think you're right. There's, all the stuff with the #Me Too campaign last year, all the stuff that we're seeing in the news. I think that, as you were saying, maybe there's going to be further stuff on sexual harassment in the workplace, certainly in terms of where things are going. But I think also just from a general overall business point of view, I think networking and the idea of networking, how people network, I think these things are going to be impacted. Maybe they're going to consider, maybe people have policies on, what kind of networking to have, because obviously there are certain types of networking that excludes women and that affects these things. But, you're right to pick up on it. It's been a pretty horrible story for the last few days, and it seems to be on the back of all that Harvey Weinstein stuff. And,
definitely. Yeah, it is. It is definitely on the back of that. And I think recently, in the States, there was this former doctor of the Olympics for gymnasts who recently got a jail sentence for like 175 years because it's harassed women. So it's happening a lot out there. I think you made an interesting point about clubs and whether or not they should, there's clubs out there that don't allow women in. There's also clubs out there that don't allow certain races in, for example, generally.
No.
Now, not in a wider sense. I mean, what I mean is sort of community groups that will, will just have a community interest, and so they have the right to say no and exclude. So the Equality Act, the Equality Act 2010. Actually allows for that to happen. So obviously in the workplace these things can't happen, but if there's a community group that have set up on a charitable basis, there are provisions there which allow that community to run its own governance structure.
Okay, so let's try and keep so Stephen has asked a question, so we'll come to that, Stephen, but let's not conflate the kind of ideas here. So as you were saying, clubs can have sets of rules and set their own rules, and they can be compliant. What we're, I guess, talking about is discrimination, harassment in the workplace or in the wider business area, which could be subject to and is subject to legislation, and whether that's going to be increased or whether there's going to be anything around that. Now, you're not going to try and regulate a private event. This is a private event. But I think the point that I was trying to make is that in the wider business community, is there more that can be done?
But I guess that's the question. The question may be: should we regulate private events, or should we, create at least some general structures around it? Because is it right to have an all men's club? Because that could be prone to abuse and the rest of it.
I don't know. I actually don't think there's a particular issue with that. I don't think there's an issue with saying. I mean, obviously, it's not. It might be a bit archaic and it's not great, but that's the club. And I think to try and kind of open that up using legislation is probably not the way to deal with kind of social changes that you want to happen. But I think that there is already recourse that in the law. So as Stephen was saying, that there could be claims that could be made. I mean, I think the specific question is, could there be false claims made? We don't know. I mean, look, I guess every system where there's the ability to have redress will have risk associated with that. But we certainly do have. There is the ability to bring, like, if someone's harassed in a networking space. There's enough in place to do that. What about clubs and groups? Jonathan is asking that are exclusive to the female gender. Exactly. I mean, I think that these things, once you start talking about them, are a bit wider than I think the blunt tool of the law can necessarily deal with. But I think that there might be something for the wider business kind of community to think about in terms of inclusion, diversity.
I guess there's sort of a line, a sort of a boundary between the legalities and also what's cultural and what's culturally acceptable and the social norms of running a private event and a club. I think it all comes down to corporate social responsibility, for example. And this was a club that had high-level executives, and you would expect a sort of a standard of behaviour from them.
I think you make an interesting point, because they were saying that a number of attendees of this particular event would be are kind of head of companies that say, we're inclusive and have all of these great things about them, and they're socially liberal, whatever you want to call it, but at the same time so there's a PR piece to the whole thing, isn't it? So that's going to play out. But I certainly we think that this is not going to end. There's going to be probably a lot more ramifications to it, whether it's legislation or kind of cases coming out of this kind of search. I mean, certainly the BBC has seen, hasn't it, letters from female editors and so it's already started in that sense. I mean, my favourite topic, we should talk about Brexit. I went to, I think I told you, London Chamber of Commerce event at the beginning of the year, and they do a kind of quarterly update on businesses, business confidence, and I've also I'll give a little bit of background. I also went to Armenia last year, and the combination of that trip and the event made me think that two things. Firstly, that obviously businesses are looking for certainty, but also that businesses will find a way through, and there's enough interest in what's happening for us to find a way through. I think that confidence doesn't need transition, so we're probably going to see some kind of transition period this year. We might see we don't know how far the legislation is things are going to progress through the House of Parliament. There's a lot of amendments.
There's still a great deal of uncertainty, isn't there, really? Uncertainty is never really good for business generally, but I can see the government trying to take some control now over this, because they have to. And at least put forward some suggestions about what's going to happen. So, for example, the GDPR is coming in May, and I think we were talking about this earlier about how some European countries are not even implementing it in their states. So, whether or not we're going to do that, it seems quite clear that from the government, what the government have said recently, that the GDPR will come in. But it's things like that which we don't know how to act and react. And,
I think kind of specifically on the Brexit legislation, I think that obviously we'll see. I think 2018 will be an important year for Brexit. I think people had enough last year and have probably kind of had enough of listening about it. But I think we'll likely see kind of confirmations on things like the free movement of people. France, Macron was here, and I think they're hiring numbers of people to have physical kind of guards on the French border. So we wanted to have like an electronic system for free movement of goods, but that's going to take a while. So if they want to have this kind of technological implementation of kind of the ability to have people moving, goods moving reasonably easily across the border, I think that will probably take time, and we'll likely see a transition period. So we'll keep an eye on it.
We'll keep an eye on it for sure. Great. And I guess we can round up on the new year and what's to come this year. And there's so much to talk about, but generally, with businesses, we're happy to support you in whatever way you need. And I guess there's a lot of companies out there starting fresh and looking for investment and support and the rest of it. So it's quite an exciting time for startups and the rest of it.
I think you're right. I mean, look, I know we've covered quite a lot of topics, and it's all been kind of in the news and about things that are going to happen. But in terms of what we're seeing, certainly I know that we've been quite busy really from the start of the year. As you know, we're in the WeWork space, so we do get a lot of companies that are coming to us and saying, look, we're getting funding in. So there's not been that kind of, when I go to the London Chamber, I go to established businesses and there's talk about confidence. Sometimes you come back and you go, actually, there are still a lot of people wanting to set up here, invest here. They're still getting venture capital funding. And as I said, with my trip to Armenia, what I realised because we're so consumed in being in London, is that people outside of the UK are still so interested in us here, because we're still very stable, secure. We've still got, great banking services, really top legal services, nowhere to come. So, it makes me feel really kind of hopeful about this year.
I'm quite confident. I think London and the UK generally is always going to be a hub for development in tech or in finance or whatever it is. I think there's always going to be a space here for that.
And we're always attracting new talent.
We are.
We can talk about that on another occasion, but there's probably needs to be some changes to the way that we manage our talent and let people in and all that stuff, because we still see issues around that. But it seems it's a good start to the year. Lots that's going to happen.
There's a buzz in the air.
We'll be doing networking events. So if you're on our mailing list, we'll send you out details about it, covering some of the topics we've talked about, GDPR. We'll find out more about cryptocurrency and do a topic on that. employment, Brexit will come up. So keep an eye out, and certainly we'll be doing our Facebook Live events.
And we hope to have new faces on the Facebook Live events. I think you guys must be bored of it. So stay tuned for that as well. So lots to come this year. I guess thank you for joining us.
And if you have any questions, send them in and we'll answer them next time.
Sure. Let us know. Thanks guys. Bye bye.
Bye bye.